Wishes well doing, and welcome back to After They Found Atlantis. Today there was a debate on YouTube on the channel Funny Old World, which is by Johanna James. There was a debate about Atlantis with her and her dad. They had a great debate. It's part one. I watched the video. I wanted to chime in several times, but I could not because I was not there. So now we will watch the video and chime in along with points interjected. Both of their viewpoints are fair. It's a great debate between a dad and a daughter, which is something that's great. And let's check it out.
Hey hunters, welcome to my channel.
No, actually, it's my channel, Dad.
Oh. Flip.
What's happened?
No, so the wet is not going to it'll dry point off.
It's all right.
Yeah.
We'll just.
Oh, what a shame.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah. You can't do that.
Hey hunters, welcome to Funny Old World. I'm Johanna. This is my dad.
My daughter.
No, but your name.
Oh, Andrew.
We're going to have a debate about Atlantis. Fact or fiction? Is it real? Is it not? We both think the opposite. So we thought, right, we've got lots of notes, we've done our homework, and we're gonna bring it to everybody, and you guys can also take part in the debate.
This discussion came about through vigorous texting each other over this, and I'm very much a researcher myself, like Johanna is. We've got the same mindset, but we just come to very, very different conclusions. But the process is the same, and so I'm wanting to discuss really with my daughter the allegorical view, the view that Plato made it up as invented fiction.
And I am going to bring to the table some scientific knowledge that says Plato might have, in fact, been onto something. I think the best way to start a debate is to find out what's is there any middle ground that we agree on, and if so, like what is that? And then we can maybe let's just start with what your view is, and I'll see if I agree with any.
Okay, well my view is, well, first of all, I have to go right back to the beginning on this one, because I found this a really interesting thing for me to do, because it was the first subject that I don't feel I had any bias in. I came to it completely and utterly knowing nothing about Atlantis, except for Plato wrote about it, and then films and other films, because I'm a bit film nerdy, and there's a couple of Atlantis films, one in the 60s, one in the 70s, and I was aware of Atlantis and this sort of underwater thing going on in super technology and all of that sort of stuff. I know this sort of like that's.
So right here, Johanna's rolling her eyes at her dad because he said something about the high technology and Atlantis together, because he had watched these movies that portrayed this. And a lot of people actually think that Atlantis had high technology, but it did not. It had chariots, it had triremes, it had like spears, things like this. This is the kind of technology they had at that time. There was no lasers or anything fanciful like that. When you start thinking that way, you think, well, the whole thing's probably made up if it's all these, outlandish things. But it actually was not. It was very down-to-earth kind of technology,
where the evolving of the story has sort of happened over the years. So I came to it a bit like I come from a very religious background, and sort of very aware of the Bible and the origins of the Bible now. So I put those skills that I use to research
and you're a
the
skeptic
Bible,
of that.
And a skeptic of that,
okay, so
from what I once was. But with this, I wasn't a skeptic about Atlantis because I didn't know anything about it, except I discovered quite soon that the majority opinion out there is, from the classicists, in terms of the literature of Plato, that it's highly likely that it's a work of fiction from him.
So the classicists say that it's highly likely that this is all a work of fiction by Plato. It's highly likely. Why don't they just say that it's all fiction? It's all fiction, we know it. Because they don't know.
Maybe a small minority of classicists who may take it as being inspired by something that happened more locally and more recent to him, or possibly some kernel of truth has come down through oral tradition.
Okay, so I think, did Plato take a story that he heard and use it for his own project, and did he manipulate it? Did he change some elements? Did he think, okay, let me see if I can make this old story, and how can I make it really relatable to the Greeks? Did he probably do that? I think so. Is everything in Plato exactly correct as to, like, is it word for word? I think so. I think the time changes elements of it. Things get moved around. So I agree with you that I don't think that it's like absolutely everything in Plato is 100%. I'm open for a wide berth of movable, fluid accidents.
Which is the Atlantis story itself. In a way.
The fluid accident.
That's right.
The original.
Well,
but what I don't think that Plato just completely invented it in his own mind. I think that is highly unlikely that he just pulled a story with no other context, with no other... it's too incredible.
So really, when it comes down to it, it's, is this real or not? Or how much of it is real or not? And the fact of the matter is we don't know one way or the other. We do not know one way or the other. If we did, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. And the classicists would know. They know 1 and 1 make 2. But when it comes to ancient history, they just don't know altogether. So it's a guessing game. So we're guessing Atlantis is real, and some people are guessing that it's not. And you're welcome to lie on either side of the argument, but it's certainly fun to try to find out.
Because the scientific data that is backing up the possibility of what he said happened, it's just too incredible.
Right, let me challenge that on many points. One of the things that funny enough, in looking at this lens, because I've got to make sure I look at that lens, is the oral tradition concept with this story. And right off the bat, I was surprised when I heard people say, oh, but it says there that it's a true story. But when I looked at the context, straight away, I found that nearly everything Plato says is in fictional dialogues with Socrates as the mouthpiece of Plato.
Dad's saying that nearly everything that Plato says is a fictional dialogue that has Socrates the mouthpiece for Plato. He said nearly everything that Plato has said or written down in the dialogues. He didn't say all, because there are some dialogues that actually take place and talk about real events, like the Apology, where it's Socrates' trial, where in real history Socrates was executed in 399 BC. So there's some of it that's true. And here we go again, we're just trying to figure out what is true and what is not. It may be 100% false, it may be 100% real, it may be somewhere in the middle. But again, we don't know. No one can say for certain.
And this is another one. And these conversations are dialogues around, like after dinner, after a festival or something, come back to my place and we'll talk.
That's the genre of movie of the day, was a dialogue.
It was a dialogue. Now, that dialogue was about 70 years before Plato. So we don't even know how the dialogue got down, if it was a historical dialogue, which most people say all the dialogues are a fictional motif. They're just a way.
I agree with that.
So there's no way Socrates said this, Critias said that.
It's like making a film.
Yeah.
It's like making a film, and it's the genre of the day. They didn't have film, but what they did have was they had plays, recitings, they had dialogues, myths, legends.
We agree on that then.
I agree with that. I don't agree that he's saying that the dialogue is a true story. He's saying that the origin tale.
One of the characters in the thing is saying that it's a true story. It's not Plato as such, but you could say, well, Plato is saying that through the mouth of Critias. So you've got this story basically where there's a setting. The setting is about 70 years before Plato is writing. So in this particular after festival dialogue, you've got somebody called Critias who's actually, they said, tell us the story that we've just heard a little bit about, and tell us about this. It's really fascinating. Oh, it's a true story. And then Socrates goes quiet for a bit.
I think it's important that we note how many times in the dialogue that they say it's true. It's a true story. They're beating us over the head. Let's look.
Concerning the country, the Egyptian priest said what is not only probable but manifestly true. The Critias. And was therefore able in those days to support a vast army, raised from the surrounding people. Even the remnant of Attica which now exists may compare with any region in the world, for the variety and excellence of its fruits, and the suitableness of its pastures to every sort of animal, which proves what I am saying. The Critias. And there was abundance of wood in the mountains. Of this last the traces still remain, for although some of the mountains now only afford sustenance to bees, not so very long ago there were still to be seen roofs of timber cut from trees growing there, which were of a size sufficient to cover the largest houses, and there were many other high trees, cultivated by man and bearing abundance of food for cattle. The Critias, of which there may still be observed sacred memorials in places where fountains once existed, and this proves the truth of what I am saying. The Critias, where the Acropolis now is, there was a fountain, which was choked by the earthquake, and has left only the few small streams which still exist in the vicinity, but in those days the fountain gave an abundant supply of water for all and of suitable temperature in summer and in winter. The Critias. Then listen, Socrates, to a tale which, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested by Solon. The Timaeus. Very good. And what is this ancient famous action of the Athenians, which Critias declared, on the authority of Solon, to be not a mere legend, but an actual fact? The Timaeus. Tell us, said the other, the whole story, and how and from whom Solon heard this veritable tradition. The Timaeus. Consider then, Socrates, if this narrative is suited to the purpose, or whether we should seek for some other instead. And what other, Critias, can we find that will be better than this, which is natural and suitable to the festival of the goddess, and has the very great advantage of being a fact and not a fiction?
One of the biggest things that I found surprising was that the day before this fictional dialogue, there was another fictional dialogue, and that's where Plato's Republic was written. And Socrates talks all about the ideal state of what an ideal state would look like. Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, Critias comes up with a story with an ancient Athens, which was mirrored so many points as an ideal state. It's just like, oh my gosh, what are the chances of that? I mean, it's a bit like when you're getting to your date of 9,000 for this younger Dryas. Well, I'm here thinking, hey, the day before you've talked about and Plato has Critias says, and wouldn't you know it, it just so happens that this ancient Athens is a reflection of the ideal state.
But doesn't he say something about, he says, yes, when you said, do you know about the ideal state? He went, yes, but I took a day to go back because I really needed to remember this correctly because it's really important. So I came back the day after because you reminded me. You reminded me of a story from when I was young that I heard, but I had to go back and I had to recall it properly and probably look at his notes and whatnot. So I don't...
Look at his notes. What is he? Some sort of like laptop person?
No, but...
You mean...
I don't find that weird. I don't find that weird
right, okay.
because that's how he said. He said... why there's like a day after and you're like, what do you know? I'm like,
well, he said he couldn't remember things even from yesterday, but I would be hard pressed to think I couldn't remember this thing from when he was 10 years old. I have to go into that, by the way.
So what Johanna's dad is saying is that the day before the Critias, there was the Republic, and in the Republic, Socrates describes an ideal state, and the very next day, Critias is saying, oh, I can't even believe this coincidence, because as you were talking yesterday about the Republic, I thought about this things in my mind about this ideal state, that this story that I know of, and it almost matches up exactly how the tale of Atlantis was. And Johanna's dad thinks this is a red flag. It can't just be coincidence right here. So it's obviously some kind of a technique that Plato's using to introduce the next story.
I thought, well, if Plato wanted to sort of show, and for a number of reasons, what an ideal Athens state would look like. Well, let's go back. Let's just plonk at 9,000. We'll go back far enough that nobody knows about it, and we'll have an ideal state of Athens, lo and behold, which is just like the one that Socrates through Plato has talked about as an example. So that raised a red flag for me. I'm thinking that's like, what are the chances of that? About the Egyptian, so basically and there's a bigger one here, because I mentioned this to you before, but you're talking about this Egyptian priest who doesn't say in the story that he actually showed these documents. So you've got the memory of he mentions that we will later or could look at them.
We will later go, which also as well, you have a very good point.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information for one person to recall. So I think
5 times, by the way.
Realistically, yes. So I think realistically, Solon, who went there, because he said, "I'm going to tell you the story now, and then afterwards we're going to go and look at the sacred register, which is the actual writings, and then he's going to transcribe everything down."
Yeah.
And so I believe that Solon would have transcribed the story that was at the Temple of Zeus.
Yeah, but now you're starting getting into no evidence.
Because, like that would be the logical, if he said that they were going to go and do that, like...
Well, he said, I think he said something like, but again...
Yeah, he says, after we can go and look at the sacred register, as in, like, the literal text, and then he'd be transcribing that, and then he would be then...
Well, the talk was that Solon was going to make a poem out of it, which is a strange thing to do, but maybe not for him.
Because there's a lot.
But he didn't. There's nothing in Solon in the history.
There's nothing in Solon's notes. But but it isn't to say that there wasn't his notes. But we've lost the unfinished second half could have been of this. It's either unfinished or
third half.
The third half.
the third part
But-
of the, it's a trilogy,
Okay,
wasn't it?
but
Yeah.
it does make sense that because there is so much to this story that isn't really important to the story. Like if you were telling the story, there is so much about the measurements and the amount of this and the amount of that. There's so much like detail in it that it makes sense that it was recorded in a sacred register.
Well,
and
that's
then it
where
was
I take a
copied
difference.
out.
I think because of those hundreds and hundreds of details, I'm just trying to sit there thinking a 19-year-old man. So you would think about granddad at 90, passing it on to your younger brother Zach when he was 10. You read Critias out and you imagine the old person, and that's the 90-year-old person who then hears it from his father, who then hears it from Dropides, which was a friend of Solon. And Solon passes it on because the priest told him it. It's like if you said today in any scenario, you know, just say I said to you today, oh, by the way, my dad just passed this story when I was 10, and this is it.
Yeah.
He heard it from his dad. He heard it from his dad. He was a friend of another friend. And by the way, it was from ancient records from Timbuktu. You'd probably go...
Okay, so it's going through 4 to 6
Yeah,
people.
4
But
to 6.
however, I do
Well,
think...
it's more. It's more than that.
I think if I... The story from when Uncle Leslie told
Yeah.
me, he was old, and
Yeah.
he told me at 10.
Yeah.
And if I told my kid... I do believe that the essence of that story of fighting someone one-on-one in the forest
Yes, but-
and dying, I do think that wouldn't get warped to a point where it was not that story
That's
anymore.
true, but the details of Atlantis,
Yeah.
where it goes to this measurement, 10,000 stadia, all of that from a kid to remember. And remember, the language of what Plato is writing is Plato's Greek. It's not a 10-year-old's mindset of how you would even phrase anything.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like he's adulted it, which means that when he's in the story, he says, oh, I'm really trying hard to remember because I can't remember things from yesterday, but I am going to remember this. So there's that in the story, isn't there? But remember, each one, I mean, imagine if the priest just made it up because they wanted to have a go at the Greeks. So the priest made it up, Solon fell for it, didn't write the poem, told his friend, Dropides, told the grandfather, told the 90-year-old, told the 10-year-old, and now Plato's doing it in a fictional story. I mean, where is any semblance of history going on there?
So it's the telephone game. We are here. There's the priest, Solon, Dropides, Grandpa Critias, Dad, who has no part in the story of handing it down. Then we have Critias the second, which is the name of the dialogue. This is why we call it the Critias, because of this man, Critias. And then we have Plato. All this time the stories being passed down from one to another, and we're losing information, and people are adding things that they make up out of their minds and think they heard. But is that the case? I'd like to say probably not. I don't think so. Because right here, my grandfather, great-grandfather, actually, sorry, my great-grandfather, Dropides, had the original writing, which is still in my possession, and was carefully studied by me when I was a child. Critias II had the original writing. The original writing. He had it there in Athens, at his house probably. It's in his possession. So nowhere along the lines had this thing been handed down and changed over again, and I don't think so, because he had the original writing. And you might say, well, Critias the second is just a character in this made-up fictional story. But is he? Is he just a character? Is he Santa Claus? Is he Pinocchio? No. Critias is an actual historical figure who actually lived in that time, along with everybody else in this tale, this supposed, fairy tale. They're all historical figures. This is why it makes it confusing for people. Some think it's real, some think it's not. The people who think it's real saying this is a historical figure talking. You could take it that way. And there's no reason, exact proof saying that you shouldn't take it that way. We don't know when this exactly was written down. No one knows when Plato supposedly wrote these dialogues at any time. They're guessing what the time frames would be. Plato, there's a chance it may not even have written these things, period. To me, they could be real just dialogues, that they're spoken word that was written down.
Well,
But there's one source, really, is Plato.
yeah, but
Yeah, one source.
there's one source. There's one source for a lot of stuff in history. There's just one text or something, and so I think that is there a chance that Plato ad lib, and did he add stuff? Did he fit more stuff into the story? But is the idea? I think it probably was an ancient story that Solon. Because here's another thing I put to you: Solon.
Right.
It's so disrespectful to put a true story in the words of someone like Solon. Like, he didn't have to do that. He could have said, I heard it from anyone, but he said specifically that this was from Solon. But if it wasn't true and he made it up, that shows a lot of disrespect, because Solon was a very well revered, respected.
I mean, these are historical figures.
Yes.
Johanna has a great point. If you were, say you're Plato, and you're gonna say, "Oh, I'm gonna write this tale," but guess what? I'm gonna throw in George Washington and Abe Lincoln. So first George goes up and he finds the yellow brick road, and then Abe Lincoln came down and he found the lost city of El Dorado. What is it? Honest Abe? He don't like to lie. Why would you throw me into this?
So it would
Absolutely,
be,
but,
it just rings weird to me that he would put it in the mouth of him specifically and repeat again and again and again that is a veritable true story from Solon. Solon got it from the Egyptians.
Yeah.
The Temple of Sais did exist, so he was weaving it into things that were real.
That's true, but did you know this? That Plato is not, he's a philosopher and a storyteller, and he does these dialogues and he communicates in that way. He's not a historian, but there is a historian before him called Herodotus.
Yes.
He actually, historians doubt whether he did it, actually, but just for argument's sake, he actually went to the place, is it Sais?
Sais.
Sais. And Herodotus went to the place and actually spoke to the priest that actually had these documents, or not for Atlantis, but documents as in history of sort of Egypt.
Yes.
And Herodotus is a historian and doesn't come back with that story. Now that's strange. You would have thought that if there was Egyptians telling people this en route, it's strange that Solon doesn't even write it.
Did he go back to get that story, or just went?
Well,
back
it's
to
just
get
that Herodotus just obviously the priest probably thought, oh well, we'll skip the story of Atlantis with this guy.
You are not worthy.
But he's the historian. Now, if it came through Herodotus, I might have some discussion with you today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even Herodotus, though, they doubt whether he actually did it. But Plato could have been going, Herodotus met. That's where I'll get that idea from, and that island sank over there, so I'll take that idea. I want to talk about the ideal state through Socrates, so I'm going to take that. Apparently, there was a contemporary place with concentric circles in the city. So there's basically you can almost look in different places to find all the sources.
Where was this?
I need to put a source in the notes. Or whatever you want to call it after this.
Source in the note.
A source.
We'll just put it up here.
But I want to go back to an even bigger one, because this is a debated thing on the 8,000 years, 9,000 years.
Go on.
Okay, so that's just what really shocked me. Now, I wasn't not so strong on this point now, because it can be possibly read different ways, but it does give a fantastic answer to why Plato may have even used it coming from the Egyptians, because I think you'll make that point. Why would he say that? Why would he give the Egyptians the ancient history? Mm-hmm. Why? Because if you look very closely, the story Critias puts Athena, the goddess, starting ancient Athens, and we won't go into archaeology about ancient Athens because it's another point I want to make.
Yeah.
But everyone forgets ancient Athens. They always go for Atlantis and the island, but there's ancient Athens in 9000 BC. Do something, look for it, and he puts it 9,000. But the priest seems to say that Athena the goddess started their city at 8,000 years, so 1,000 years later.
Yes.
Which makes me think that if that's where the records he's talking about, the records start at 8,000 years. So you've got 1,000 years of Chinese whispers before you get to the 6 generations of the kid and the 90-year-old and the father and Critias. So what's going to happen
Athena
between...
starts the city of Athens,
Yeah.
and then 1,000 years later makes Sais.
Yes.
Which is where everything's recorded. Yeah.
And they say basically the implication, the natural reading is that the records go back 8,000 years, which means you've got 1,000 years of hearsay.
But who's did that's
well, because the war seems to have taken place in 9,000 years.
Yes, so the war was going on, but there's nothing to say that
Who's going to write the
Sais,
records?
So Sais was where the records were held from its conception 8,000 years ago. But who's to say there wasn't another hall of records?
Well, now we're going into no evidence.
No.
Again.
But I'm saying
yeah.
if you can pull it, you can't read that as in like, well, that doesn't make sense. It's like maybe he just didn't mean it in that way. Like if the
it's almost like there's an omniscient record keeper
also,
somewhere. But our city started 8,000.
Record keeping doesn't have to be, as we say, in a book or on a temple. There are oral record keeping traditions that last hundreds of thousands of years because
wow. I mean that's now going into. I mean with memory studies today, that oral traditions just don't work like that. It's the fact that you can get. The commissions
have wisdom keepers. They have oral traditional keepers, and they don't believe in like writing it down. And they keep the oral traditions going, and it is passed on, and it is seen as like it's like learning and memorizing. But
I'll give you Bart Ehrman's book on memory then.
Yeah, I mean, memory is bad. Yeah, but memorizing. But
to assume that so this might tap into assumption about maybe if there's ancient technologies, there's ancient memories that's so good that we're useless.
No, but there's other places that could have. It's not that Sais was the only places that did record keeping. There are other places where there were records kept. So that city that was made 1,000 years after.
Yeah, that's why
it doesn't mean that it was only oral record.
Well, if in the natural reading of that. If you could, it gave the one interpretation. It gives the reason that Plato's sticking it to the Egyptians. He's saying because apparently outside of this story there was a talk of the fact that Plato's Republic was a lot of Egyptian ideas. So he had critics saying, "Hey, you're taking a lot of Egyptian ideas for your ideal state."
Well, yeah.
So if Plato was to invent a story to put 1,000 years before Egyptian records, and they're saying, "Aha, Athenia started us first. Ancient Athens comes before Egypt." Wow.
No. It doesn't come before Egypt. It comes before that particular city of Sais.
Well, that's true. That's where I revised my research
that's
on
where
that.
because
Egypt does seem to be
also,
there as a landmass.
If Plato was just making it up for his own thing.
Yeah.
Why even include the Egyptians? Why include them? Like it doesn't have to come from the Egyptians. And also, it's really weird that the Egyptians are the one going, "Ha ha, you Greeks know nothing."
Yeah.
Like it's a weird way to say that the Greeks are cool, because actually the only reason they found out about this history is because another Egyptians have told them. The Egyptian priests hold the monopoly on that, and it's a weird dynamic. Again, if you were just making it up and making yourself look good, why would you credit history keeping to another place?
Well, because in the story that he's inventing, he's got rid of the island and ancient Athens. So of course you're going to have someone who hasn't got rid of to keep the records of it, otherwise the knowledge isn't going to come down. So he's trying to work out that. But this whole idea of Athenia starting ancient Athens, which looks just like the ideal state in the Republic in so many details, like the warrior class, which is very explicitly talked about. It's not even explicitly actually talked about that Athens is destroyed. It's the warrior class that says sank into the depths of the earth, I think, something like that. So even that would leave Athens still around. It makes it worse because ancient Athens, as far as we know, is 3,000 years old.
I think that and that's another thing that's weird as well. If you're doing,
do we look the same? Are we arguing just like each other?
If you're doing a tale about good guys versus bad guys, it's really weird that the good guys die as well. So there's this morality tale that he's weaving into it. However, it doesn't.
The third part might have explained that. Why was Athens, who's the good nation, smaller?
No. Why were they? Everybody died in the deluge. Everybody. Yeah. It didn't matter at the end of the day. You've got the bad and the good.
Well, hang around. The Egyptians didn't.
No, the Egyptians didn't die in the deluge. Exactly. But I'm saying that the everybody in the Atlantic colonies and everybody in the Mediterranean colonies all got wiped out in the deluge.
Yeah.
Or affected by the deluge, or damaged by the deluge.
Yeah, actually just says that the island went down of Atlantis, but the warrior class of the Athenians
because of earthquakes.
So presumably all that place between the Mediterranean might have been affected. But that might be placing. If Plato was here now, he'd say, I wasn't really picturing it like that, because you're looking at it through geological younger, eyes.
Interestingly, that whole area, the whole area was absolutely deluged.
Well, I mean, that's coming deluged. Into another realm.
Around the date that he said it was. It absolutely was.
But one of the things apparently with memory, certainly in Bart Ehrman's book, with modern studies on memory, is actually numbers, dates, even locations change with the telling of the story. Like, it wouldn't be too hard for someone to hear you talk about my uncle in the Vietnam War, and Zach could have heard that, pick it up and you say, there's this story exactly the same, but now it's the Vietnam War. This is what happens.
Yeah, I'm not debating that
yeah.
that couldn't happen. However,
So the 9,000 years, too much of a round figure for me. I mean, what are the
of course,
chances?
no, and this is something that I find this really weird.
Yeah.
Why do you feel like it's not? It's not like he said 8,492
And 22 hours.
No. He said for 9,000 years, which means it's around a rough number. It could be 10,000 minus 1 year, or it could be 8,000.
That's fine, but notice when he said, and then Zeus was formed by, we have to go into this by the way, by the gods, Athena, you know, so how true is that? 1,000 years later, so it's like, it's not, you're just rounding up, you're just saying, of course,
it's
okay.
not, so you can't throw it out. Don't throw it out because you don't believe the exact number, because
numbers can have poetical meanings.
When you say, if I say the Victorians, I go, oh, they were 100 years ago. Actually, they weren't. They were 130, whatever.
Exactly.
Technically, but you say it as a rough. So, but even if he was saying it as a rough, it's interesting that 9,000 years ago was the end of the Younger Dryas period, of a period of crazy deluges.
So your big thing
world.
is like picking that particular figure. I think that he
So
just picked out a long enough distance back so that no one's going to know.
No.
He can invent the story.
If he'd said 20,000 years, it wouldn't have lined up. If he said 5,000 years, it wouldn't have lined up. 9,000, it actually has to be between 9 and 11 and a half. That's his window of being correct.
You can bet, though, if the story said 7,000 years, someone might say, ooh, there was translation error. I think it was 9 to fit with what, you know what I mean? People do that.
But then they would, I'm saying there's no translation error. It is bang on the money.
People have thought it was 900 and 1,000 or 9,000.
No. He's saying
sorry,
what
not 9,000, 900.
Let's just take it as what the text says.
Yeah.
The text is saying, he's saying that he's claimed he was told around 9,000 years ago, this is when this society was alive, and they all got destroyed. And he is bang on that. Okay, getting the date correct, one thing. Getting the location of when this destruction happened to that area on the date that he's saying. Again, if he'd said that date in that area at a different time, if he'd said that date in another area...
So you think beyond the Straits of Gibraltar and the 9,000 years is so significant geologically wise?
He's on the money. So if he'd said that it was in the area of North Turkey, 9,000 years, or the area of Sweden or whatever, if he'd put another place on the planet at that time, wouldn't have worked. If he'd put the area of the Atlantic at 5,000 years, wouldn't have worked. It's that he picked the time and the place, and it's bang on the money. And the evidence that there were deluges and catastrophes going on of a scale to completely wipe out and submerge an island, the science is actually going to Plato. Well, you might have got that date right.
Well, the problem is that you're mixing, this is the archaeological sort of historical sort of, I don't know, investigating the planet and physical thing. Like, for example, the story itself talks about Poseidon and the gods and Athena, and there's mixing with mortal men.
Yes.
It's all part of that story on the island, like the 10 kingdoms on the island that you say sank with this sort of thing.
No. It doesn't say 10 kingdoms on the island. It says that the Atlanteans were many islands and many kingdoms. It's not just one island.
No, there's not just one island. There's lots of islands, but there are 10 kingdoms on that island, so we can debate and find that point.
No, there's 10 kingdoms.
Right, okay, well, that's a discrepancy on what we think we've read then. Because there's 10 kingdoms on the island founded by 10, basically there were the gods.
Yes.
Basically birthed.
The 10 gods.
Mixed with mortals, and they birthed and they started. Now, of course, the true story, how true is that? Is there anybody out there that thinks that all of the gods...
Okay, but then this is interesting.
So, do I think that the gods were, like, making the world and everything? I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I hate to say it, but I just don't know what somebody might consider a god, you know? And I don't think you can... look down on those that believed in Zeus and Poseidon and Athena and all those gods, when today we do the same thing. We worship gods, and there's a huge part of the world that actually believes in all the gods that we believe in today. It's a science of explanation. That's what mythology is. It's a science of explanation. There's a story behind it to make it easier, I think, to understand.
Because I think also as well, we both have a very different idea of what the text is saying to us.
Yes, in many points, yeah.
Atlantis isn't the name of an island. Atlantis is, well, it's either the capital city, but the Atlantean Empire
is bigger.
Is-
It's one massive island plus lots of other little islands plus
It
having kingdoms over the Mediterranean.
It wasn't even like actually a massive island. It was an island. It's also never referred to as a continent ever in the text. That's something that's been added on in.
Well, it is the size of Libya and Asia.
No.
Yeah.
Again.
Yes.
No. It doesn't say.
No.
It doesn't say size.
Yeah, I love this here. Often it's said that Atlantis was a continent that sunk. And like Johanna's saying, it's not a continent. It was never said to be a continent. There was an opposite continent, but not... Atlantis is always said to be an island. And Dad is saying that it's... Well, it might as well be a continent because they say it's as big as Africa and Asia put together. In the dialogue, it says it's bigger than the extent of Asia and Libya put together. Now, my statement would be, what did they consider Asia then, and what did they consider Libya then? So, that's what we have to go by.
Hang around, but that's it does say in the text. You can't start changing it. Like I want to keep the 9,000 years. The text reads to me that it already says Straits of Gibraltar to Egypt. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
So we know that distance. So
Yeah.
if it's bigger than that, at least one of the dimensions, it could be a thin island, but of the main island. It does seem to be a main island. I read it as 10 kingdoms. You need to go back to that.
Yeah, it's
but
10
there are
10
other islands around. I
10
certainly read
kingdoms,
it as
not in
it's
the same
very
line.
close to the mouth of Gibraltar, because in Critias it talks about the mud shoals and they cannot get out to go anywhere from basically the Mediterranean, from what seems to be the harbour.
Okay.
So the mud shoals are meant to be the leftovers of the thing, which isn't there now, but it must have been.
But they have found the mud shoals. That it's not in the Gibraltar anymore. It's not in the Strait anymore. But the mud shoals are all down the coast of West Africa.
So that's where it's argued. Okay,
so they are there.
Yeah.
The mud shoals are there, and at one time there is definite evidence that it was
because
exactly
it said
where,
that the
exactly
sea was
where they
not
said it
navigable at one point.
Exactly.
And then
you couldn't access the sea
Yeah.
because there was a mud shoal, and the mud shoal is broken out now.
But that does mean that the island must be almost invisible sight with binoculars from the straits.
So
if it was there.
Well, no, it doesn't actually say that at all.
Well, yeah, because it says that when it sank,
Yeah.
the mud shoals were there and stopped people going out to anywhere. So it wasn't like you could go out to the middle of the Atlantic and then you can't go anywhere. It's like you can't really get out.
So you can't go out of the Strait of Gibraltar anymore
no. So therefore, the island must have been sort of virtually hoppable.
No, it doesn't say that. Like,
well, it doesn't say that, but
this is where I think in your mind you go. You're kind of adding words in to where it isn't that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say. It says it's out from.
It says the sea wasn't.
It's west.
Yes,
but it doesn't
the sea
say,
isn't navigable. It's not like you could nip out on the straits and go left.
Yeah.
It's like you can't go out.
Yeah.
So you're stuck within the Mediterranean.
Okay, so
that's how I read it. But,
yeah,
but then you need to say, well, is this the embellishment over thousands of years in the storytelling that actually it's a small island in the middle of the Atlantic and not this massive one that seems to read about?
Okay, so it's not. It isn't actually. So the actual dimensions of the island. So one, Atlantis is a kingdoms of. It was many islands.
Well, I dispute that. I think it's 10 kingdoms on one plus.
Where does
other
it say
islands.
that 10 kingdoms
Right,
on one?
we'll
have to pull this
we'll
up.
have to pull that out.
Because
Actually, I think they're both right here. Dad saying that there was 10 kingdoms on the island itself, that is correct. There was 10 kingdoms ruled by 5 sets of twins. Atlas was the first of the sets of twins, and he got the name Atlantic named after him. Plus, Atlantis is also named after him. And then all the other twins owned parts of the land, of the island. But Johanna's also right, because it also says that Atlantis was an empire that had rule over parts of the continent and other islands, and Dad also said that they had sway over into the Mediterranean later on. So I think they're kind of both right here when they're arguing this.
Because they were also the word for island in the Greek can also mean other things. It can also mean like peninsula.
So I've heard Johanna say this before about there being a different translation for the word island. So I would like to make it clear that I think they knew the difference between an island and a peninsula. So he's talking about, this is Critias, he's talking about Greece, or ancient Greece. And he's going to describe it like this. The whole country is only a long promontory extending far into the sea away from the rest of the continent. So what he's describing is how Greece comes down out of the continent in the Mediterranean. It comes down like this, right, into the ocean. Here's the continent, and Greece kind of goes out, and it's shaped like a squid, kind of. You know how we have the boot over here, Italy? Then we have Greece right next door, and it's a promontory. So that to me is a peninsula. So I think they knew the difference between a peninsula and an island. And I don't think you can consider like, well, Atlantis could be a peninsula. The island, it may not be an island. I really believe that it has to be an island because I think they knew the difference.
And things like that. So the Atlantis Peninsula, it doesn't have to also be. But one thing's for sure,
Well,
it's definitely not a continent.
Right.
It's not the size of a continent, and it's not that's not what. However, there is now what can be called a microcontinent that is submerged in the Atlantic Ocean. So that does.
Well, I mean that's another question, I suppose. I'm talking about reading. I mean,
But in
I don't
your
see there's
mind-
any problem in the sense that you know that they've looked for Atlantis everywhere on the planet.
Yes.
There isn't really a problem with that because if you go with my view of oral tradition is hopeless in memorising what really happened. It could have been a little island off New Zealand or something in reality.
There's a reason
that got
why.
morphed
So
into this
there's a
giant
reason
story.
why everyone looked
You
for
know.
it, because everyone was looking at the Atlantic Ocean,
Because
and then
that's- yeah.
they did a kind of a look for it, and because they couldn't. But however, they haven't. This is really where it went a bit weird because they have not categorically been able to rule out. Well, they haven't because there are things that.
It's just gonna go. Exactly. You know,
Just,
it's not even beer; it's water.
After the 70s, somebody did Atlantis Fact or Fiction, and they stated categorically in their opinion that there was no submerged continent in the Atlantic, which is true because there is a continent. In nowhere in the text does it say continent, Atlantis was a continent. That's something that's
Yeah,
culturally
but
happened.
hang around. If something is actually big as we know the distance between Gibraltar and Egypt is,
Mm-hmm.
and how far you go down is another question. That's massive. That's a continent island.
Okay.
Because that's so big. I mean, it's massive.
No, the only measurements of the island that it is there is actually 1,000 and something.
No, because I
10,000
pointed out to you that
which
10,000
is-
stadia was something on the island, which is way bigger than
Yeah,
you
which
thought.
is
Yeah.
so the actual measurements of the island, if you're looking at the text, it's 300 and around 50 miles, which is that's the
350 miles, you mean?
350 miles, which actually is the size of the.
Yeah, I think it's way bigger than that because I think that there's slightly contradictions between Critias and Timaeus because it talks about the people who live up in the hills are of an infinite number. Now, I'm not saying there's infinite human beings there, but that was obviously a way of trying to say too many people to count on the island.
Yeah, but so many- but then-
in the mountains, we're talking about mountains and
Yeah, but
waters.
we're also
This-
only supposed to know 100 and no, is it 150 people is what your brain can actually
Well, yeah,
know
but
really
I mean,
well.
they're painting it so big that the 10,000 stadia is all to do with all the talk when it comes to the city.
Mm-hmm.
And people get confused. And have you probably heard this, that people seem to think Atlantis is this concentric city, as in that's it. The
No,
island
it's-
sort of is a circle. I've seen
many
people talk like
islands.
that. It is many
There's
islands.
a main island, but there's
There's a
nothing to
main
say
island,
that it was
yeah.
massively huge.
Well,
okay, but also here are the points here.
Okay.
So it says that the island was greater than
Libya and
and
Asia.
Asia.
Yeah.
However, so you've got two things.
Yeah.
The size of Asia and Libya at the time that this was being told in to the Egyptian.
which is about
priests.
600
Yeah.
BC.
Or if they're telling that from the story, the original story or whatever, smaller. But also, who's saying that they're saying that it was greater? So you've got there's either two options that in my mind it also fits very well. So you've got the Polynesia
Yeah.
is massive. It's over 1,000 miles of Polynesia and the Polynesian Empire. However, not a lot of that is land. It's the islands that map up the empire of it. So Polynesian, it's a huge area, but the actual land mass is actually quite
So
small.
now you're trying to interpret. So what's wrong? Let's start the other way around. What's wrong? Just taking the story as I read it, because I'm not really into geology and all of that. What's wrong with reading that the island is possibly as big as Africa?
Because
What's wrong with that? Because you would have to say, well, there's no real existence of that. But that's it. What's wrong with saying it in the story? That you could literally go from the Straits of Gibraltar, go right across that, hop to another couple of islands, and hop to a main continent.
It doesn't say hop.
Well, not hop.
It doesn't say hop.
But it says from there they can go.
It says you can pass too. So if you're a maritime thing, you can sail every which way. Sailing in an issue.
So passing through could be 1,000 miles to you.
100. If you're a maritime. If you're a maritime, they're also saying that. So they've.
That isn't the way it reads, though. It reads that you can actually go across the island.
No, but to you, because when I read that, it doesn't say hop. You put in these little words that go hop, pop, and a pop, and I was like, actually, to them, crossing over and passing through and to, if you've navigated to the North American continent from Egypt, if you've been able to navigate that,
which they probably didn't, because there's the mysterious West at that time.
But they probably did, because if
they did, they would have known that Africa's as big as it is, and you've said that they don't.
But so there's two ways to say that. So they say that at the time Greece were always fighting with who? Libya and Asia. So when they reference Libya and Asia, they're greater than the force of Libya and Asia combined. That is another way when they were trying to push the...
So what you're trying to say is a very fancy way that's saying that the Atlantis is greater than Libya and Asia, and you're saying actually it's not to do with really this landmass, it's to do with their kingdom. Well, you might as well do something to the 9,000 years then. That 9,000 doesn't mean that, it might mean 900.
I mean, it might do. Like I've said,
language.
I've agreed with you that everything in this could be flowy. It could be fluid. It could.
And you've got to remember, this is if it's accurate. I mean, there could have been one guy in this period between the 8,000 when the record started who said 900 years by accident.
But what we're saying is that there is truth in the fact that you can't throw the whole thing out and go, therefore, because this one line, I'm going to read this one line in the way that I see it, I'm going to throw the whole thing out. I'm open to the idea that we don't know for 100% certain that when it's saying that Atlantis, the peninsula, the islands, the kingdoms were larger than. How do we know they're not referring to it in a maritime way, like the Polynesian Empire?
Yeah, but can you see your bias there, though? What is wrong with an Africa continent that starts from the Straits of Gibraltar and goes right to the edge of South America?
Because that isn't there.
Why?
Because
that's where the bias is, you see, because if the story said it and reads like that. Now, when I first read the story without knowing any geology, I read it like there was something quite close to the Straits of Gibraltar and there was this opposite continent, which is the true continent.
It never says quite close.
And I thought, well, do they know about the Americas?
In.
That's a question. I don't think they did. I think the West in Greek at that time, the Greeks thought the West was this mysterious thing.
But then how did they know the opposite continent? How did they know about that? Because they say you go from the strait. Wait, you go from the.
So, the opposite continent. This is one of the biggest clues that we have that Atlantis might be real, because it says in the Critias that there is an opposite continent. And Dad says that is something probably Plato imagined that happened to be true. That sounds like a coincidence. So let's pretend that it's 100 years after Plato's time. And there's two people arguing over what is real and what is not in the dialogue, and one person's saying, well, let's follow the map. Let's leave from the Mediterranean Sea. Let's head out into past the Pillars of Hercules, and according to the dialogue, there should be islands, and then you should find a whole opposite continent, and you should find that between the two continents there's a giant ocean. Now, all this would be found true. So I think it's a good point to realize this, that today, looking back, it may kind of all seem sense, but to them, if you were to read this a long time ago, all these things would turn out to be true. So why not the rest of it be true?
Straits. Then you hit some islands.
Well, it wasn't navigable.
You hit islands. Spartal Island. And then you hit other islands, and then there's like a mainland, and then you pass on to other islands, and then you go on to the opposite continent. There is no other continent. We've only got 3.
But that's because that's our universe. We don't know what they knew. And so they may have been imagining, well, there must have been something out there. So that's one possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
But here's to an argument. What does logic say? So they've just found that there is evidence of humans navigating waters, being maritime, efficient from up to 180,000 years ago. They found out that Neanderthals now could sail. They've pushed back. So even if we're being conservative with the evidence that they found and push it back 30,000 years instead of 180,000 years, let's be really conservative with it. 30,000 years ago, humans were sailing around and Neanderthals were sailing around. To say that they didn't know where something, like, I think that we weren't giving them enough credit, and there is credibility in the idea that if 30,000 years ago people were sailing around, why 9,000, 10,000 years ago?
Yeah, but it's at the same time of people using language of these gods. I mean, we're talking about the island in the story is not the island of some geologist back then. So we're talking about a 9,000-year geologist and historian. We're talking about a story where gods come down, start a kingdom with mortal women, and these gods birth these people in the kingdoms. They then become this amazing empire.
Yeah.
And to suddenly say that, trying to get so historically literal in there, at the point of just you haven't mentioned about the gods, about, well, did the gods found the island?
Okay, so
interesting. Is Athenia real?
No. So, well, there would be an original source for her, and there would have been an original. I believe every story has a seed. People don't just sit and write out of pure. They write from context. They write from what they've seen, what they've heard. They evolve it.
Greek mythological gods.
There's a reason why the Egyptian priest included the myth of Phaeton in there. Because that is all complete allegory for the Younger Dryas comet. They're saying about the Phaeton, and he asked for his dad's chariot, and then the moon.
So you're just seeing mythologies as having roots in something historical.
I'm not even seeing it. I'm saying that why do we have stories? We have stories to tell important things that need to get passed down in a way, like you said, memories crap, in a way that people are going to retell and retell to get the essence of that. What is behind that story? So obviously they're going to create characters and stories in order to pass that down, but there's a reason why the Egyptian priest Plato included it as well, because it's all linked, that the myth of Phaeton has complete parallels with the Younger Dryas comet. A chariot is the symbolism for a comet, and it says the moon looked at her brother and the comet, and it's all about the earth being put on fire through the myth of Phaeton. If you actually look into it, it actually is a complete parallel to the Younger Dryas comet. It fits within the story and the timeline and everything. So I agree that there's parts of the story which talks about gods and whatnot, because I say that's the genre in which they were trying to tell the story and keep the story alive, and obviously they were relating it to Greek gods.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Plato believed in those gods as historical
neither do I. I don't think anyone
did. By the time
did.
of Plato, they were just the way of
exactly.
that they talked. But it was the language.
But the story
but it still mixes with the island. You've got an island and a god that comes to it with mortal women. So at one point you're going to say, well, actually none of that's true, but the island is physical.
Well, yeah, because
somehow it originated Neanderthal-wise, maybe, or it originated with hominids, but not originated with the gods.
So
it was a high-tech place in comparison.
Well, it was civilized. Also, okay, so there's also
in comparison. I mean,
the time that we're talking about is at the end of the Ice Age. So there's huge ice sheets over North America and the north of Europe, and the Gulf Stream that keeps England warm today, that goes up around the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
It was different back then. It doesn't do. It goes into Mexico now, and then it comes up and around. It didn't go as high at the Ice Age 12,000 years ago. It actually went up, and it encircled the Azores and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and it made the climate there amazing. So even though it was an ice age, because of the warm Gulf Stream and the way that it has changed, and it was thousands of years ago, it would have made those islands in the mid-Atlantic really hospitable. So it's not within the realms of impossibility that ancient man, 50,000, 30,000 years ago, sailed around out of Egypt and North Africa and Spain and everywhere, went across to these islands in the middle of the Atlantic and found that it was actually amazing.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to make points like that, remember the whole thing I started with was the literary side of it, of the whole thing, and that Plato had every ability, reason, and position in all of his writings when you glean things to make up this story. But just say, for argument's sake, I was saying that there's memory problems and everything else going down to the actual island. You've actually got a situation where, first of all, you have to be careful not to be drawing from not settled science yet on how old things are, because it's fringe still. A lot of the stuff that you are into.
No, well,
but okay. So say the Younger Dryas isn't, but you could. Let me see. Probably 99.9% would not be a Randall what's his name?
Carlson.
Person. So they would see him as like, okay, so he's typing into that
Yeah.
with the Atlantis story.
Okay.
But what about the parallel? So nobody has found anything yet. You know that they've looked for Atlantis.
But they have.
Nobody has found anything. Of Atlantis.
They have found.
Wait, look, how come Atlantis has been looked for everywhere in the world?
Mm-hmm.
All those Atlantis followers, and probably a few people here, or lots of people here, are kind of talk about North Africa and southern Spain, Antarctica, England, Ireland, Florida.
It's throwing you off because people.
But they're doing it because they're not.
Yes, but what I'm trying to tell you is that they were wrong. Everybody from the 1970s went off on a wild goose chase because they didn't fact check the possibility of it being where Plato said it was.
Whereas I think that they didn't fact check the literary reasons for why it could be an invention.
However,
story.
I think that if the literaries had any idea of the scientific, that I think some of them might sway. Because, for an example, when you're saying we're going on Earth out.
Right, it says right here.
Okay,
So that's the end of the great debate. It was fun to jump in and try and make some points with these guys. That's part one. There's another part. I'll probably perhaps do another segment with them when they release their part two. But there we have it. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.